Cover One, the Draft Podcast. Welcome to it. I'm Russell Brown with me, CP Christian Page, down in Mobile, Alabama at the Senior Bowl, wrapping up the final day of practice. Tomorrow's a chill day before Saturday, which is game day for the Senior Bowl between the National and American squads. CP, my man, how are we doing?
Man, I'm good. A little tired, but I'll take one for the team because it's again another week, another fun experience, and some really good guys that have popped up on as far as the scouting radar goes, and some guys that had some buzz coming in, maybe or just a predetermined opinion, maybe didn't answer the call, and I know we'll get into that in just a little bit.
Yeah, it's fun watching the timeline during this week, and I think I said this earlier, but it's always fun watching people's reaction to seeing a player for the first time or just seeing how they practice and seeing the difference between playing in an actual game compared to doing like stuff one-on-one. Like I've always said, I'm a defensive line guy, but I love offensive linemen at heart, and I hate one-on-one drills because I just at times I don't think it's incredibly beneficial for an offensive lineman. I think it's sometimes just an unfair situation. You know what I mean? And like for the defensive lineman, he only has one job, just to get around that guy. And like that's the case in most situations. But like in the game, like if you're an edge rusher, you got to squeeze things down. You got to play outside contain. But in a one-on-one drill, you're just trying to beat up the guy in front of you, and you really don't care about your actual job responsibilities. So whenever I see the one-on-one stuff, I'm like, man, it's really not that fair. But then at times you do see like offensive linemen like helping each other. Like this week, especially, I've noticed this week, especially guys are like giving a little tap and stuff. And I'm like, okay, it seems like the Dolphins and the Panthers, their coaching staff are coaching fairly loose, but also like I saw a thing on Matt Rule before practice or maybe after one of the practices. I don't know if it was today, but he was like just talking to the guys and basically saying, if you keep saying yes, sir, I don't want you on my team. And it was like, I don't know if you've seen that video. I'll look for it. I'll repost it on Twitter. But man, it was really good stuff. And all I could think of course, was him eating chicken wings, but that's beside the point. But let's jump in. I'm all over the place. Let's jump into yesterday's practice, which was Wednesday's practice, the second day. And we didn't do a show yesterday. You put out a kind of a news and notes article on what you saw from day two, some players that stood out and all of that stuff. Going even back to that article or just outside of it, some players that stood out yesterday.
Yeah, I think one of the most notable guys, and this is what the platform's for, is when these lower level Group of Five or even FCS players come into the Senior Bowl. Most of the time, at least I can speak on my behalf, it's the first look we get at them because film can be limited to a certain degree, and that's when a guy like Quinn Miners, the Wisconsin Whitewater offensive lineman, just kind of takes people's breath away. And look, I'm going to limit and temper some of the expectations. He's still maybe a little shorter, maybe a little more squatty than some teams would like. But I think he's made a lot of noise here. I'm not going to say he's a top 100 pick quite yet, but I think there's some buzz floating around if some teams see him fit maybe in a certain blocking scheme at center, at guard, either guard position. He's made enough of an impact this week so far at the Senior Bowl. He shows really good snap quickness and goes to work quick. You can see his reactive tools are there, and he has that intelligence to, drop his weight when necessary, to, kick slide when necessary. His feet and body positioning are very, very solid. Give credit to our boy, Owen Reese up there coaching him and getting him in the right position, because the guy, he looks really, really solid. He's very technical. And even though, the height and weight measurables may not be that desirable to some teams, but his physical build in the sense of, how he maintains that leverage, how he positions himself really checks the box. And, he's trending too because, he's your typical throwback offensive lineman that doesn't like to pull his shirt all the way down. So he has kind of that beer gut going on in true Wisconsin fashion. So a lot of people like that as well.
I was going to ask you about that. What do you think of Quinn's? I mean, what do you think of the aesthetics here? I mean, he's got the belly shirt going, the belly jersey, I should say. And I mean, I love it, man. He's showing off the keg. He's and I will say too, on the tape side of things, from what I've seen, the dude's quick as hell with his lower
Mhm.
body, really quick to snap. But yeah, what do you think of how he's dressed? I mean, you gotta be loving it, right?
Oh, of course. And he has a little bit of beard, the long hair coming down as well. So like he checks all the boxes from your prototypical, Midwestern to North type of offensive lineman. So I was really excited when he just embraced that complete package. And hey, he brought a lot of attention to himself. Maybe it was on purpose because it worked.
For sure. Well, I will say I have not seen everything like you have, and obviously you'll need to go back and watch tape if you haven't done so already from the practices for groups that you haven't watched yet. But I've spent a lot of time watching the offensive line and defensive line because normally that's where you and I are paired at the hip, somewhere in the back of an end zone watching these guys. But yeah, I've been watching from home, and I watched yesterday's practice a little bit, and I saw Dylan Ray Duns and Creed Humphrey just really pop. And I know I'm kind of taking the easy answers on that one, but like Dylan Ray Duns, just how athletic he is. He's a former basketball player, and I've talked about him enough on this podcast. You go back and you can find receipts on that, but like the athletic background that he has from being a former basketball player, I believe, if I remember correctly, he did track and field. He was a three-sport athlete, and football is obviously his thing. But he can play anywhere on the offensive line at 6'5", 304, and then you've got Creed Humphrey, who's done a tremendous job with reach blocks. He was asked to do that a ton this week, it feels like, and I think just very clear, like zone-heavy teams are going to be looking at him. And like I don't know if there's a team specific in the first round that could be targeting him, but it would not surprise me if we did see his name in this first round conversation, just simply because of the injury that happened to Landon Dickerson. And teams do covet centers. We've seen it in years past. Ryan Kelly was a first rounder, Frank Ragnow, Billy Price, etc. Or Garrett Bradbury as well. So I think we could see him go somewhere in the back end of this first round. Maybe it's the Chiefs. Maybe it's your Tennessee Titans. I know they've kind of rolled the dice on offensive linemen before there, but Creed had a great day yesterday, and I don't know how he looked today, but that's where we're going to kind of segue into who stood out today with it fresh on your mind, third and final day of practice. Who are some guys that really stood out?
Yeah, we'll go to the defensive side, and I completely agree with what you said about Creed Humphrey. And we can get into him and talk about his, draft evaluation as we have many, many weeks to prep on that and compare really two different style of players with Landon Dickerson and Creed Humphrey, especially from a height weight standpoint, and probably, most likely a scheme
Mm-hmm.
difference in both of those guys. So that will definitely be one of those, projections going to be really difficult because they're two totally different players based on field performance, but also when you plug and play them at the next level in a certain scheme. But one guy that stood out in the American team is defensive back Richie Grant. He's a safety, listed as a safety from Central Florida. This guy was all over the field. He looks really good in man coverage. He looks really good on off situations and zone packages as well. He has that lower body explosion, and you can just see he's one of those guys that when the ball is snapped, you can just see his instincts and the intelligence just come to be. He always knows where the ball is. He's a magnet to the football. Obviously, you're not going to see much tackling skills in practice, so maybe we'll see a little bit more of that in the game on Saturday. But he was a guy, I think he had one, maybe even two picks today. I know he for sure had one toward the end of practice. So Richie Grant, a guy that's a safety that may be a little more flexible as well, because I think he looks good in man coverage situations as well. So he had a really good day. And another guy on the American defense, Cameron Sample out of Tulane. He was kind of an unknown coming into the week for me, but he was a guy that just really flashed with his upper body quickness. He jumps off the snap with that burst, and then he goes to work quickly with his arms. And I don't have his weight in height and his length measurables in front of me, but he looks like he has decent extension. He uses arms very quickly, and you can see he overwhelmed a lot of offensive linemen this week and even today as well. So Cam Sample, defensive lineman out of Tulane, he's a guy that I'm probably going to hit the film room pretty soon and watch some Tulane tape because he really stood out this week. And think, going back to Mike Mayock days on NFL Network, who made some money this week? I think Cam Sample did because he probably caught a lot of people by surprise, at least speaking for myself.
I'm currently looking him up, 6'2", 274, 81-inch wingspan, um,
It makes sense.
which really is not bad, considering the fact that he'll probably be asked to do a variety of things from standing up or playing in a 2-eye or 4-eye. Because Quincy Roche, who also, from what I've seen, has had a good
Mhm.
week out of Miami, Florida, he's 6'2", 243, and he's got less than an 81-inch wingspan. So that's really not that bad. I guess we will both have to watch Cam Sample, because I mean, if you're saying he's looking good, he's got to be looking good. Um, I was going to ask a question. I completely zoned out on what that question was going to be in regards to today. Um, Oh, it was Richie Grant. He had, from what I saw today, a ton of interceptions. I don't know if there was like an interception tracker, but I watched a game of his of like that defense a few weeks back, probably right before Christmas or something, and I'm like, wow, whoever this number 27 guy is really good. And I didn't bother looking at, like, deeper into it until like a few days later, and I'm like, oh, that must be Richie Grant. Sure as enough, that's Richie Grant. Now he's off to just doing phenomenal things this week and showing incredible range. And I want to say I saw something. He had like 3 or 4 picks today. But yeah, it's crazy. But who today or just throughout the week had kind of a rough week and might need to take some time and get some work done?
Yeah, a guy that had a rough week that may have had a little more expectations coming in is Trey Smith, the offensive lineman out of Tennessee. And
Mm-hmm.
we saw a lot. We were talking about him, you, me, Eric Turner over at Cover One. We were talking about how he struggled at least the past couple of days. He looked a little better today, but you still see some bad habits, whether that's overextending, not getting his pad level down, not dropping his weight, not moving his feet appropriately, because then, maybe that goes into what you're saying about the one-on-ones that you can, hopefully your teammates will help chip on you and stuff like that and take away a little bit of the pressure. But when you're being evaluated as potentially a left tackle, he played a little bit of left tackle today, somewhere inside, you're going to have, and I think he's more of probably a man scheme, at least just given his body and his movement skills. You're going to have to face a lot of those one-on-one matchups and not so much rely on somebody helping you out. And I think he missed the mark this week. And he was a guy that had an up and down 2020 season. He had a lot of hype coming into the year. I know he's dealt with some of the blood clot issues, but he got back into football shape. But to me, it wasn't necessarily a physical disadvantage from getting his body back in shape, but it was more of a mental and technique disadvantage in some things he struggled with this year, and it kind of carried over to this week. So he was one guy that I think from a name recognition standpoint, almost everybody knows him as far as NFL draft circles go. And I think he was a guy that maybe had a chance to, get back on track to that recognition and that reputation that he had coming into the year and as a recruit. And I don't think he did much at all to really get people going back, going back to bat for him again. So Trey Smith, I think, is a guy that stood out to you in maybe more of a negative way as well. And yeah, I think he disappointed a lot of people this week.
Which is unfortunate because, like, he had some unfortunate things happen that probably has delayed his process of getting to the NFL. And now he's getting that chance, and just from what you're saying and really from what I've seen as well, like through practice clips and through what I've seen on Twitter, he's had a rough week. And it's unfortunate because, like I said, he's worked his tail off to get to this point, and all these guys have. But like you said, he's struggled with the initial quickness of guys on their pass rush, the overall speed of guys, and I like this happens to guys. It happened to, I believe it was Nick Harris last year when he was playing for Washington. He came to the Senior Bowl. He struggled with speed and power, and it was
Yeah.
one of those things where Trey, I think you put him in a phone booth and he's going to beat the hell out of you 9 times out of 10, but you might be able to definitely outrun him here and there. So, I did want to ask this question. We were talking about it pre-show, and we talked about linebackers, and, we didn't really say that anybody stood out from what we've seen, but really Baron Browning out of Ohio State's been that guy. And every year there's a guy that slips into that first round conversation. I know our colleague Zach Hicks has been slamming the table for it, saying that he's going to go in the first round, but Baron Browning in the first round is like this a week where like there's got to be, I guess my question is going to be, is Baron Browning one of the guys? And is there two or three guys from this week that have maybe solidified themselves into the first round? And if so, who are they? Who do you think they are?
Yeah, I completely agree on Baron Browning. I mean, the guy is in, linebackers, I don't want to say they're necessarily hard to point out in Senior Bowl practices, just given, how their one-on-one matchups go. But you'll see a lot of times, they'll have coverage reps in a man situation with tight ends. Sometimes they'll be off and picking up some of the running backs where they're catching balls out of the backfield or running in certain, scheme situations. But Baron Browning, I mean, he was a guy that when he can unlock his hips with so much ease and he can run like a deer. And his athleticism gives you that flexibility and potential versatility that you can just quote unquote take a risk on him in the first round because he brings so much athleticism. We talked pre-show, guys like Micah Parsons or Owusu Koromoa from Notre Dame. Those are guys that meet that athletic profile that I think you can just plug and play them and they can give you versatile opportunities. And I think Baron Browning's probably more of I don't want to say a true linebacker than both of those guys, but maybe you can put him in more of a true linebacker role and not as much rush the passer, though he can give you multiple blitz opportunities as well because of his athleticism. So I think that's definitely a guy that I think could meet the mark as far as first round goes and those expectations.
I don't know. I think of the Lions and what they need at linebacker, and I'm like, maybe I'm going just nuts, but like I'm like, man, if they were able to get an extra first round pick and possibly get in the back end and just they get their quarterback at 7 and then take a linebacker in the back end of the first round and it's Baron Browning. I mean, okay, give me Justin Fields and Baron Browning. I'm okay with it. Like I'm perfectly fine with it. That could very well happen too. So we'll see what happens there. All right, so we went
I didn't
through.
answer the second. I didn't answer the second part of your question as far as guys solidifying their first round status if they, came up to be that. I don't know. I don't know how many guys came into this week with first round status. I mean, maybe Kadarius Toney out of Florida was one guy, and he definitely did not disappoint. There's a couple drops here and there, but as far as the quickness and route running, responsibilities that he had, I think he looked fantastic. And you saw certain packages that, the team was using him in. And I think he stood out big time in a positive way, but we expected him to stand out. So as far as first round guys, I don't know whether any of that popped in your head that had that first round status coming in. Because I'm trying to think, even though it was a very talented roster, you saw Najee Harris, I don't think he did anything overwhelming to be like, yeah, he's for sure the number one guy. But I think there's a lot of guys that maybe more solidify the top 45, top 50 than maybe solidified and put their foot down on first round status. But we just talked about it, Baron Browning. I think he made a lot of noise as far as maybe I think you can probably write an ink as the third best linebacker in this class.
That I you know what? I kind of like that. I kind of like him as like LB3. Like that's pretty solid. I think that could be a really nice spot for him. I will say this, David Moore, and I think we might have talked if we talked about him earlier, forgive me. I think we just did pre-show, but out of Grambling, David Moore, we've always talked about players getting an opportunity to like just prove themselves. He's doing that this week, and you said it pre-show, like he's been very impressive, and I tweeted it out earlier, a video of him in practice, and I'm like, dude, he reminds me of Nate Davis out of Charlotte, not maybe as squatty in his stance, but very comparable size, very comparable frames, and just the way that they play, I think is very, very comparable. I think David Moore, who may have been a day 3 pick, could very well go somewhere in that third round range, similar to Nate Davis when he went to the Titans.
Yeah, I like it. I'm watching Nate Davis this year. He had a great year. He actually had a couple of all-pro votes as well. So, you saw that maturation come with him. And yeah, I think if you get more in a man blocking scheme, and I know he's not necessarily your length that you would want in a man blocking scheme, but I think just the way and the style that he plays with, where he just wants to beat you in the ground every single play. And he plays with just such great positioning as well. he is a brick wall to move. And
Hmm.
some players were able to do it, but more so they would do it when they were moving mostly to the outside shoulder. But he's going to play inside. So for me, if he gives up maybe a little pressure on the outside, I think that can kind of be supplemented, hopefully, with a quarterback that has good pocket mobility, and maybe a right tackle or left tackle that can chip or just kind of keep the space confined. So I'm with you. I think more in a lot of these offensive linemen from the lower tier schools really did a great job this week, and Moore was definitely a guy that stood out. And I know there's a lot of buzz on Twitter, and it's justified because the guy looked really sharp today, and he looked really sharp this week.
I'll end it with this. Outside of the kind of the predictions for Saturday, got to mention a couple of quarterbacks. If you watched them today or yesterday, were there any quarterbacks at all that stood out um, between the last time we spoke?
Yeah, I'm not going to go down the the Mac Jones, scouting report because we knew he was going to impress, and I think he looked good today. And the ball doesn't jump out of his hand as much as I wanted to see it in live, but he understands the anticipation, and he knows
Hmm.
he has that velocity control. I guess that's the right scouting term, where he knows that he doesn't have outstanding arm strength, but he has enough, and he understands the anticipation, the development of the route to get the ball in an accurate position and his receivers to make the play. So he showed that today. Struggled a little bit because they came right out of the gate in a 2-minute drill. I think there was like a situation where it was like a 3rd and 5 with 1 second left, and they're maybe on the 30-yard line, and he threw a pick right on the goal line. But still, they had to push the ball down the field, tried to score. Given those situations, that's one thing that you have to really pay attention to when you're watching some of these practices. But I think Jones this week looked fine. But a guy that we mentioned on the last episode, Ian Book from Notre Dame, I really haven't seen him really struggle at all this week. He gained some kind of rapport with these receivers, and he constantly found John Bates in the end zone multiple times, the Boise State tight end Bates. But Ian Book looked calm. And to be honest, this may be the first trip that I've had to Mobile where no quarterback really struggled or never gave multiple, inconsistency. Sure, Felipe Franks has a little bit of a wind up and timing issues. Does Ellinger have the greatest of arm or the greatest, smarts when it comes to coverage? No. Jamie Newman, does he try to force things down and does he have the appropriate mechanics? Not all the time. And same with Kellen Mond. I think he needs to focus on some of those velocity controls. But I knew those coming in, and I didn't see really anything else that these quarterbacks didn't do, or I guess did do worse than what I had seen already on film. So, maybe that's a hot take, so to speak, but these quarterbacks didn't look bad. But I don't think any necessarily made their stock worse because we've seen that happen sometimes at the Senior Bowl, especially when you're compared to a bunch of these guys. But maybe there wasn't an outstanding quarterback with the exception of Mac Jones, where these other quarterbacks could look so much worse with that big gap coming from the tier 1 quarterbacks to, maybe those back end guys. But I thought the quarterbacks, I never came away being like, oh, that was a horrible throw, X, Y, and Z. If it was, they came back and they, took advantage of that opportunity the next play.
I'm really glad that you mentioned Mac Jones and the anticipation of all that and how he anticipates really well. Because I know a few weeks ago I put out a video clip of him doing just that, and it's like that's exactly who he is. He anticipates extremely well. He knows what his arm is. He knows how far he can throw it, and he knows it's not that far compared to other quarterbacks. But and he knows every ball is not going to be pretty. He knows that, but I'm glad that he's had a good week without the supporting cast that he has. I'm hoping it translates to success for him in the NFL because I like watching him. He's a fun watch, as boring as he might be at times, but he's still fun to me. And yeah, Ian Book, man, like he's going to get drafted. I just don't know where. Like, is it a team like the freaking Raiders or something? Like, is it something like that? Like, I don't know exactly who he gets drafted to, but he's going to get drafted. And I definitely think that's going to be the case this week is that he's going to be drafted. With that all being said, we had a great recap here. Senior Bowl, the game is on Saturday. Who are a couple guys, it doesn't matter if it's one guy, two guys, some guys that you think are going to stand out?
I think a guy that stood out all week, and I expect him to do the same in the game, is one of your favorite players of this entire draft class, is Amari Rogers, the wide receiver from Clemson. The
Yep.
guy was a lot quicker in person than I expected. And he showed
Hmm.
some of that quickness at Clemson, but I saw, I don't want to say necessarily stiffness, but I saw maybe some limitations in his lower half. Well, I could completely throw that out of my mind because he was doing certain cone drills where he dropped his weight. He had kind of those pitter pat, steps that you like to see when guys are coming and changing direction on their routes. So I saw a lot of that, and I would expect him to be a vocal point for this American squad because he put on a show this week, and I think he's a guy that let's say Mac Jones is playing in the game, which I expect all these quarterbacks to play in the game. Seeing a Mac Jones and Amari Rogers hookup, that's going to be pretty because it's going to give a lot of, I want to say Devontae Smith vibes because I don't think he can necessarily create that separation like Smith, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a little bit of shades of that connection in the game on Saturday. So that's a connection I'd like to see. As far as the national team, I don't know if Dwayne Eskridge, the Western Michigan wide receiver, is done for the week. He did not practice today, so I'm hoping maybe we could see him in the game on Saturday. But most of the time, if they especially sit out that last practice, they probably are done for the week, along with Tylan Wallace, the wide receiver out of Oklahoma State. So those were two guys that stood out as well. But one of my favorite guys in this class, I think you can probably say the same thing, Michael Carter, the running back out of North Carolina. I've always said it's hard to evaluate running backs throughout the week of the Senior Bowl because there's only so much they can do, especially in a
Hmm.
non-tackling scenario. So Michael Carter finally gets to put his impressive week of practice from a running perspective, a blocking perspective, and also a receiving perspective. He, along with his teammate Khalil Herbert, the running back out of Virginia Tech, I think both of those guys are going to do a lot of good things in the game for the national team on Saturday.
I love it. I got three guys to keep tabs on. You already took one, which is fine. Um, that would be no, you actually didn't take him. Never mind. Rob Jones out of Mid Tennessee State.
Mm-hmm.
I think has had a pretty solid week. He's had some misses, but he's had a pretty solid week. Incredibly strong hands. That flashes so much. He's relatively consistent with his hands inside, elbows locked in. He's good there. So I'm excited to see what he does. And then Demetric Felton out of UCLA
Mm-hmm.
has been fun as hell to watch on some of these
Yeah,
one-on-ones.
absolutely.
He's electric. I think Jim Nagy had a tweet as far as what his top speed was. I think he ran like 19.78 miles per hour or something, which was the top for, I think, yesterday. So I'm super excited to see what he does. And like we've seen guys like Antonio Gibson make the
Mm-hmm.
jump from wide receiver to running back. We see Felton playing running back. He could easily make the jump to wide receiver. So I'm intrigued to see what he does at the next level. And I'm super intrigued to just see what he does on game day, because I think that'll be when everything kind of comes together. Even if it's through the basics of everything, I think that's when everything will come together. But the last one I'll say, and I've been talking about him all week, I'll say Jamie Newman, the quarterback out of Wake Forest. I know he's had some rough throws. I've seen some throws where he's made some interceptions, poor reads, and the ball just kind of stays in his hand for a little bit too long. But I think with a good game, maybe that will kind of change anybody's mindset on him. And I don't know where the consensus is on him, but I think it's probably consensus day 3 pick somewhere. But overall, you take him and try to mold him, because I think there's a lot to work with for the future. So it's fun time for Saturday. This was a great episode of the show. You got anything else for me?
Yeah, one guy that I forgot to mention, I had a good day
Yeah.
today and then yesterday in day two. Benjamin St. Juste, the cornerback and kind of safety, he can kind of play a dual role out of Minnesota. I thought he had a couple of pass breakups today, looked really good and comfortable playing the slot and over the middle of the field. He's a guy that's really caught my attention the past couple of days, a guy that I wasn't incredibly familiar with coming into the week. So he was one guy that I needed to mention. I had him written down, so I needed to mention because he definitely stood out today. But as far as that, I mean, Marlon T, the defensive tackle out of USC, he's had some really good flashes as far as practice reps go in those one-on-one drills. Tremendous quick upper body and has the lower body to get his feet going and to kind of match that upper body quickness. I know you and Eric Turner both like his skill set as well. So those are two guys that I had written down, failed to mention, but look forward to seeing on the game on Saturday, but I also look forward to jumping back into their film.
I like it. I like it. Well, CP, appreciate it. I appreciate all your hard work this week. It's been, I know, somewhat of a lonely grind without us down there, but we will be back next year for sure. So, everybody, be sure to find Christian on Twitter at underscore Christian Page. You can find me at Russ NFL Draft. Be sure to smash the follow button. And then, of course, you guys need to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And you can do that by searching us on every single podcast platform that you have. And that could be YouTube, that could be Spreaker, Spotify, wherever. Go ahead, find us, Cover One Draft Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. So, CP, enjoy the rest of your night. Have a cold one for me. Enjoy tomorrow, and we will talk again next week as we probably dissect my mock draft a little bit and maybe a little Senior Bowl recap for after the game. But until then, this is Cover One, the Draft Podcast.